Welcome to Healthy Mothers, Healthy Babies, Healthy Communities, a program of the Missouri Bootheel Regional Consortium. I'm Valda Ford, your host, and it is my great pleasure to have with me Dr. Sandra Jackson. She is going to talk to us about the FLY program and about mental health. Welcome, Dr. Jackson.
Well, thank you. I'm excited to be here today to talk about two things that are really near and dear to my heart. The FLY program, which is a support group that stands for First Love Yourself, and just to talk about mental health in general. So,
First, love yourself. How many of us have not done that? How many of you are not doing that right now? Let's do better. Let's hear more.
Sure. So I often use the analogy, it's like when you fly and you get on the flight and the flight attendant says to you, if you're caring for someone that dependent on you, that you put your mask on first.
Right.
And oftentimes we forget about that piece. And the First Love Yourself has that sort of notion of like, when I take care of myself, when I am at my very best, then I can really do a better job of serving and supporting those who are dependent on me.
Oh, that is so important because so many of us now are taking care of parents, babies, somebody else is cheering them. And so we are just worn out.
Yes.
And so when they come here, I know many women have just taken on all the burden, all the extra responsibilities, especially since the pandemic, with the whole world changing. And do you see a lot of women coming in here who really, really have not had anyone else to support them?
Yeah, I think that they put themselves last. And somehow in society, I'm not sure how we have gotten to this place, but it certainly have gotten there, where somehow it gets this super mom complex, and you can do it all and you can have it all. We need to share the load, and that's a reality for us all at every level. And so when we're taking on those multiple roles, we're spouses, we're siblings, we're children, we're parents, and sometimes grandparents or step parents, and all of those things, and the sense of kind of community that oftentimes I think about, even in my own generation that was there, isn't always there, and the isolation that many of the women have experienced. And then you couple that with the pandemic, there's been lots of like sort of depression and anxiety that goes along on top of all the cares of caring for those who are dependent on you.
And why do you think that women have put themselves in another place? I know that I see them just feeling that as the nurturers naturally, as the people who give birth, they feel that it's their role to nurture and they don't ask for help.
Yeah. I think asking for help, just recently, I had one of the participants in the FLY group said to her that was one of the most difficult things that she has to do. We were talking about communication and how do you ask for what you need. And that was kind of the subject that we were sort of talking about. And she talked about her style is really that pretty assertive. But she said, I'm pretty assertive about a whole bunch of things, but not that great about asking for help. And she said, I think it might be because I don't want to be perceived as a way or feeling weaker or not competent in my abilities. And so she said, sometimes I suffer quietly.
Wow, that's really sad. I've seen many people as a registered nurse. I've seen many people who have been taking it on. I had a dear friend of mine commit suicide, and I did not see it coming. And I have felt bad about that for years, but she was working. She was relatively newly divorced, so she had taken on a lot of the financial responsibilities. She had a son who was just troubled. Really troubled. And then her mother became ill. And even though she was from a really large family, probably 8 or 9 of them, she ended up being the one who was working 2 jobs in 2 different cities and absorbing all the responsibilities for her mother. And then she got into a relationship that seemed to lift her up. It seemed to be so great. And then she found out the guy was married. And I don't know if that was just a tipping point, because, sometimes when you're down, it's better to stay down. And then when you come up and get slammed back down again, And I was so disappointed that I didn't see it. But like her, I was doing kind of the same thing. So, that whole mental health part where, especially in the African American community, we have not truly embraced the idea of getting into help.
Yeah, I really do appreciate that. I talk a lot to the African American community about how to normalize mental health the same way that you normalize physical health. We know that there are factors in your nurse that disproportionately impact us. Hypertension, like we know that just being in this skin,
yes,
ups the game for us. And so I don't know, I want us to get to a place where we're talking about mental health and depression and things that run in our family, and why auntie whatever don't ever come downstairs and out of her room, or why all those kinds of things. There are those sort of quiet secrets that we don't ever talk about and pass on. And so I'm on a mission. I'm on a mission to normalize it and to say the word suicide, and that people have risk and there are things that are going on for them. And sometimes they feel hopeless and helpless. The other piece I always tell people, I said, mental health is like 1 in 8. So I always say when I'm at church, on your pew, somebody, if they came to see me, probably could leave with a diagnosis of probably depression or anxiety. Some and some of them, and 1 in 4 for folks who have a serious mental, so schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, schizoaffective disorder. So when you think about those numbers, it's pretty common.
Pretty common. So you got 8, as you say, on every pew or in every classroom, every row.
Correct.
There's going to be someone.
It's going to be that way.
And why is it so bad? I mean, I know I see people who are so depressed when they come in for a visit. I'm just wondering how they even lifted themselves up, got out of the car and walked in the building. I mean, you can see it all over them. But that's when it's good, because when it looks like that, somebody's going to say, you haven't smiled in a month. You're not bathing, your clothes aren't clean. Your children are just running around by themselves. So when we see it, it's actually better as compared to those people who were just like smiling and keeping going, like the young man Twitch from the Ellen show, who everybody thought he's at the top of his game. He's making money. He's producing on a major program, and he committed suicide.
Sure.
Nobody saw it coming.
Right. So I think we need to be asking about people, and we need to be checking on our strong friends, is what I say all the time to folks, like people that you perceive as really strong. How important it really is for us to be checking in, and not like, how you doing?
Yeah, I think too, if we see the change. I remember I was really depressed. I was working this job. It was a great job. It was a job that I loved, but my boss was crazy. And I think she didn't know it, and I didn't know it, and not in the way that it's a mental disorder, but that she was just mean, and she just made all of us crazed. But I felt like it's okay. I can deal with this. I was the only Black person in the whole building, and it had been 10 years since there had been another person who looked like me in the building. So I kept absorbing the fact that, okay, I'm going to expect some things. And then when I was trying to be the advocate for some of my students who were just being beat down and just having little things said about them, and you hear about the weathering concept of people who are constantly being beat down like you're in a storm all the time, and I speak up to them, that would mean there was more that came back to me. And then my sister died of cancer, then I fell and tore my rotator cuffs, and I was thinking, okay. And then all of a sudden my blood pressure was just about through the roof. I didn't even know how much I was taking on, because I thought, I'm good, I'm strong, I'm a young woman, I got this. My back is, jump on it. I was like, oh, I'm about to die here.
Correct.
And when I went to see a therapist, because my boss said, you need to go see a therapist.
Right.
And not this dean, that's someone else. And she said, well, you can continue doing what you want. You can keep fighting the fight. You can keep doing all this racial, ethnic diversity, fixing stuff where people are hanging up nooses, or you can live. You make a choice. Living, please, for 100, Alex. Yes.
Yeah. I think that is so important for us to start to ask ourselves questions. And to notice when those things are different and make it okay. I think in the African American community, I think in the faith-based community, that we have done a disservice to people. I talk a lot in churches about mental health and mental health diagnoses and how to ask for help. And it does not mean it's a lack of faith. And I say to them the same way, if you were diagnosed with hypertension or diabetes, no one in this church would say, stop taking your insulin because you don't know Jesus. And I said, so the same way with this organic piece that happens in our brain, if there's medication that is helpful for some people, it is, and it's a game changer for them. And that they don't need to feel guilty about that. And I tell them all the time, I said, listen, you can have Jesus and a therapist.
Exactly.
You can have Jesus and a therapist. I'm a living witness of that combination works really well. And really sort of normalizing it for folks to say that it's really okay. Also doing a lot of work in the faith-based arena with leaders to teach them about mental health, what to notice, what to pay attention to. When is it appropriate to refer?
And when people are coming to faith-based leaders because they want to unburden themselves, if they're just saying, it'll be all right, just pray more, just give it all to Jesus. When they don't know, if that leader doesn't know, that is a cry for help, not a cry for prayer, though we can have both. But that is a cry for help. And as you said, when should they be the ones to say? Not only you should see someone, but be aware of who are the people in the community, especially those that have been working with communities of color, because there can be some differences.
For sure. I run into that often where I represent a small minority of providers of mental health care. And sometimes I have had people actually say to me, like just you can get it. You can understand. And I don't represent every Black person, and I don't try to or pretend to, but sometimes there are some cultural nuances for sure that folks don't get.
And the other thing is just about getting a therapist in general. The first person you talk to may not be the person you need to stay with. We will change our hairdressers, we will change our grocery stores, we will change where we shop, but we'll stick with the same provider because we don't know that we can say, you're not the one for me.
Right. I tell people all the time, I'm a size 9 shoe. Every 9 does not fit. So you have to try on shoes until they fit. And providers work for you. You are the driver of the bus. And I tell people all the time, you allow me to get on the bus with you, right? And I come alongside you. But at any point, you can say, lady, get off the bus.
Yes, indeed.
And so helping us to understand that too, that we're the driver. Like we are the circle, we're the middle that making everything else work.
Right.
And so oftentimes I think providers have done a disservice to folks by having that hierarchical piece about, I know what's best for you, and shared decision-making doesn't happen. And those kind of cultural kinds of pieces that mean something to that person.
Right.
And using language, this whole clinical language versus what's just common folk language, so that when we leave here, we're on the same page.
Right.
I know as a provider, one of the things that I will never forget, this was several years ago, I was working with someone and doing a treatment plan. And so we were reviewing the person's treatment plan. And I made a comment about, there didn't seem to be a lack of progress in this certain area. And the person turned to me and said, that was never my goal. He said, that was your goal for me, but that was never my goal. I never told you I was going to do that. So we have to really hear and listen to what the person is saying.
Mhm.
And they may have a whole laundry list of things that they need to work with, but just asking them, where do you want to start?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because the other part, a person can feel really overwhelmed. If I got a whole bunch of stuff going on, it's like, where do you start? Like, you don't even know where to start.
Mhm.
And then asking them, like, what makes sense? Where do we want to jump in on this?
Mhm.
And what makes the most sense for you? And we don't do enough of that.
Yeah.
And I say, I have some training and some expertise. I don't shy away from that, right?
Mhm.
However, you're the expert at you. So you put two experts in a room, you're probably going to get a pretty darn good result.
Mhm.
And so if we're working together, and so if we go about it, that approach is really, and strength-based, like they may be struggling here, but there's some other areas where they have done well.
Mhm.
And so maybe it's not happening for them, but was there ever a time where you were at a healthy weight? And what did you do? And what worked for you? And what
Mhm.
didn't work? And what you, like taking the time to do that. I think sometimes we get into this like sort of fast-paced thing. We're clicking the computer, we're making sure that all the boxes are clicked, and we forget there's a person in front of us who's
Yeah.
living a life, who has a life, and like, what do you want your health for? Not what's wrong with you,
Exactly.
right?
Yes.
And so that's a whole shift in how you even think about it, right?
It
Rather
is.
than, you need to lose 20 pounds because of obesity, but a person saying, I want to be able to,
Walk up and down some steps.
walk up and down some steps. I want to
Yes.
be able to, tolerate playing catch with my grandson.
Mhm.
It's meaningful,
Mhm.
rather than you need to lose 20 pounds. It just feels different.
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah, I know. That has worked so much even for the physical parts, as you're saying. You don't say diabetes is this and this. Well, don't you want to be walking down the aisle with your granddaughter or with your daughter or something like that? Yeah, that is so good. But you know what I've seen lately is that the pandemic took a lot of healthcare providers out of the mix. And I don't
True.
know how, I know everyone was feeling very stressed, probably some quiet hysteria going on. I've lost my job. Am I about to lose my job? I've lost my house. Am I about to lose my house? Will I ever get back to the income that I want? Will I ever be able to go into the grocery store, period, without a mask or at 6 a.m. because I'm older? What was the burden on practitioners during that time? And do you see that a lot just went away? They just were like, I'm too burdened myself to
I think
continue.
it reset a whole bunch of people for what is a priority
Mhm.
and what was really meaningful for them and what they were willing to do and not do anymore.
Mhm. Yeah, I've seen some people who were, and there was some study about a guy who was in New York and he was a bartender and he was a bouncer. So basically all that service related stuff. And he got to where neither, they didn't have bars open, therefore they didn't need bouncers.
Mm.
And he had the high New York City rent and he couldn't make it. And so he figured out, well, all I've been doing basically is working to work, to pay, to work, to work, to pay. And he just stopped. And he and several others just said, we can live this place together. We don't have to pay $3,000 a month for an apartment that's this big.
Yeah.
We can do without some things. And they came back to him 18 months later, and he just says, I'm a happy person because I took the burden off myself.
Yeah. We often chase things, success, whatever that means, and gets
Mhm.
defined for you. Sometimes it's income and that kind of stuff. But really what the pandemic taught us is what was really important.
Mhm. Mhm.
What was really important to me,
Yeah.
what meant something to me.
Yeah.
And the things that we have sort of casually taken for granted, family, health, those kinds of things,
Mhm.
all became like you had to be still
Mhm.
because the world was still. And it was a time of sort of reflection in a lot of ways. But for providers, it was hard for us too, because we were managing that. We had kids that were home from school and went to a virtual format. People weren't coming into the office, so we had to flex in the pivot in the middle of all of this chaotic stuff going on to provide care.
Yeah.
And so if you were not technologically savvy, it was hard for you.
Mhm.
It was hard for you to be able to do that. And then how do you provide care for the folks that need it in a modality that you may not even be that comfortable with?
Right.
I will tell you that my virtual work quadrupled during the pandemic. Because I was one of those kind of diehard providers that was like, I want to see you face to face.
Yeah.
And I can't get off of TV what
Your
I can
energy.
get. Right. And I have come to find out that may not necessarily be true.
Yeah.
And if I hadn't been thrust into this pandemic, I don't know that I would have come to that conclusion. So for a lot of us, we had to pivot, kicking and screaming,
Yes.
but pivot nevertheless. And actually, we did some changes even in the fly group. So we moved from face to face. So we meet twice a month. We met up until the pandemic. We met face to face, and then we moved to a virtual format, to a Zoom format, and so that had its own challenges in itself for the women who were a part of the group. Because when they came face to face, MBRC does a really great job of supporting that. So they get transportation if they can't get here, they get childcare reimbursement if they can't get here. I mean, all of that happens for them when they were in person. And so when we went to the virtual format, sometimes they would be in the group and, burping the baby, or, the 2-year-old comes running through, hey mama, kind of thing like this. So it's had its own challenges. But I felt like it was so important for them to have that for them during that time of isolation. And so we stayed in that virtual format. And then once the acute stage of COVID lifted, we kind of talked about it as a group, like what do we want this to look like? And so, folks had mixed feelings. They said on one hand, while they certainly do see the support of like getting the travel and the childcare reimbursement, they're like, but when you putting 3 kids together in a car seat to the babysitter, then come for 2 hours to this, and then got to go do that, they're like, in some ways, like that virtual thing is really kind of okay. And so, I said, listen, this is your group. I get the privilege to help facilitate, but this is y'all's. And so however you want that to look like. And so we do one session in person and one virtual a month. And so it allows the best for both of them, for both folks to be able to participate. And so that's where it kind of landed, and that was kind of generated from the discussion with the participants. And so again, I tell them it's your group, but y'all driving the bus. Y'all just let me get on every week.
Yeah. So tell me, for people who have never been to a therapist, who may not really recognize the signs of depression, may not know the difference in sadness and depression, or understand that depression doesn't have to look like this. It could be agitation. It could be, I can't sleep and I sleep all the time, or vice versa, So what would you tell them in order to understand when they might need some professional help?
Yeah. So a couple of things. So you're absolutely right. The difference between sort of sadness and depression is the length of time. So it's more than sort of the blues. So when it gets protracted for a significant period of time, that probably is an indicator. And sometimes it is decreased energy and poor sleep, or it could be the opposite. You're getting no sleep. It can be weight gain or weight loss. So it's kind of tricky sometimes. And it can oftentimes depression is masked as just a general, even if it's not anger and you're cussing people out and throwing things or anything like, but like a general feeling of just irritation. Like you can't really you don't even know why you feel like that, but it's just kind of there. And so I tell folks all the time to just kind of notice that your body keeps score. Your body keeps score, and to just notice where it shows up for you. And I know for myself, whenever I get to feeling tension and stress, it shows up for me in my shoulder and my neck area. For some people, it's headaches. For other people, it's intestinal kind of things. It's tension, it's tightness, it's soreness. It can be a whole bunch of things, but your body is going to tell you. And also, I tell folks to not. I try to give language to emotions. I feel like we have not, as a society, and certainly as a Black culture, giving language to emotion. We know what mad is, we know what happy is, angry, we know 4 of them. But there is such a range of emotions. And sometimes folks don't know how to put language to it. And so that is part of the work that we do in the Fly group too, is to help folks to, and then you don't have to, emotions are not, emotions are part of who we are. And so you don't have to be ashamed of them.
Right.
You don't have to hide them. The real key, I'd say, look, emotions are like your check engine light on your car. So when my low tire light comes on, I don't get out and kick the tire. I don't scream at the thing that lit up. What do? Go check the tire. And if the oil light comes on, you lift the hood and you go look. And so emotions are just that. They're indicators. And so I think we judge, like if you get angry about something, folks will be like, oh, I can't believe I got so mad about that. So they start judging the anger rather than looking for the source. And so we can get lost in all of that. And then a lot of times we keep a lid on all of that stuff. And then we carry all that stuff. And then don't get me started about trauma. Trauma and childhood trauma that has carried on, unprocessed trauma that we have buried, that we have numbed ourselves to with either, sex, alcohol, drugs, shopping. It doesn't, over spiritualizing stuff. It's a whole bunch of stuff we do around trauma, and trauma is only going to get better if you process trauma. You got to peel away the layers, and we have packed on stuff. So it's a lot of unpacking that needs to happen. And it's really important to have a safe space in which to do that. So important for us to be well and heal. Part of healing is that. And I think we need to think about healing in a more inclusive, a more expansive way. That is that whole process that has to happen. And it's a non-linear process. So it doesn't go in these little nice steps, y'all. Sometimes, you think you're there, and then all of a sudden something will trigger it, and all of it's like, whoa, the stuff comes flooding back. But it really is important that we talk about trauma, that we acknowledge trauma. Another piece is grief. I don't feel like we do enough with grief. The grief work that happens. I recently I was in a group and the piece came up about miscarriages. I had no idea several folks had miscarriages and had done no work with regard to that.
Somebody probably told them, don't worry, baby, you can have another one.
Correct. And so allowing space for folks to grieve all kinds of losses is so important. And it's more than people too. It's like who you are and identity, and sometimes a job that was meaningful, something that you really identified with, and then that goes away. Like, who am I? You feel really lost. And so and then just recently I've been doing some grief work, and one of the things that I was telling some pastors actually recently, I said, we do a really good job in the church with mourning. We do not do such a great job with grief. So mourning is all that outward stuff. So we do the repast, we do the funeral, we do lives of celebrations, folks bring flowers and food and all of that. We do a great job of that. And then there's grief. Those are two different constructs. And really the effort really needs to be made to help people have a space in which to grieve and go through all those stages that are required to get to healing. Otherwise, you have a whole bunch of grieving folks.
I hadn't even thought about that. I mean, we do have all the ceremony.
Yes.
But then we don't have
grief is internal work.
Yeah.
And mourning is the external, if you just sort of think about it, just like in those kind of terms. And we do a great job of that. We support people and, but if you think about it, after a few weeks, all of that stuff sort of goes away, right?
And like, girl, you better get on up and go to work, or just get your new man, or whatever else. Like, didn't matter.
Right. And the reality is, like, grief work needs to happen. You need to go through those stages.
Mhm.
You need to be, like kind of, did this really happen? Is this really true? Like denial and bargaining and anger and depression, and then getting to a place of sort of resolution. But all of those steps need to happen. And oftentimes people are stuck
Mhm.
in one of those.
Yeah.
And sometimes when you see people who are really profoundly depressed, they may have some unresolved grief
Mhm.
that they have just never dealt with, and they are stuck in that depression. And once they resolve the grief, then their depression will get better. So it's a lot of work and opportunities, I think. And one of the things that I am super excited about is that FLY, that space, it's not therapy, but it is by design that a therapist is helping to facilitate it.
Right.
Because it's a lot of skill, tons of support for one another. It's women who are experiencing that, some are further along in it than
Mhm.
others. And to see that peer support is pretty amazing to do. And they create hope for one another, which is really like fantastic to be able to sort of observe that,
Mhm.
that piece for each other. And they have a safe space. They have a safe space in which to kind of talk through some things. And we talk about a number of things, communication, like we were talking about communication recently, and we were saying, sometimes it's easy to communicate what you need to some folks. And I said, can you name one person, that is hard for you to say no to? And we were just having that conversation, and it's generated a whole bunch of discussion with regard to that, because we all have that. I mean, that's for all of us. And I said, there's usually them folks that's close to us, because,
Yeah.
those folks that are farther away, we can say no,
Yeah.
and not feel bad about it, and not feel guilt, and they don't guilt you and all that kind of stuff. So lots of education that is happening and learning. And I tell them all the time, I am both the teacher and a student, that I go into it with that feeling humbled, that I come out each session too better,
Mhm.
because I've learned some things about life and living, and things that I hadn't considered. It makes me a better therapist, I think. And also, but I share very transparently about me too. I was like, I don't have all the answers.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think that is an important piece too.
Yeah. Wow. I just get so excited about the fact that kind of program exists, and that they have someone like you who can help them, because you are being real with them, and you are being a guide for them, and you are learning from them. I mean, what better combination is that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a trifecta, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Going all those different directions, and I really love that and I'm so grateful for the opportunity. I've had a long-standing relationship with MBRC. Really just value the work that they do. It's such important work in this Bootheel, where there are very little resources. We know the numbers are staggering as it relates to women of color and our babies, and so is this kind of work that keeps me hopeful, that there are folks still fighting the good fight. And if change is going to happen, it does start at this grassroots community level. So I appreciate that.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Oh, no, the pleasure is all mine. And for those of you out there, is there a way that they can reach you?
So they can call MBRC.
Okay.
And if they're interested in the FLY group, they can give you all the details. And I don't have very many rules. The one thing that I say is, like, we come into that in a way, and that we in an honored space, and that if you have the capacity to be able to hold what we talk about and share there, then you're welcome to come and grow. And with the idea that I will say this, it's skills, but we do have some like outside in between session work. And it's usually just practicing the skills that we have learned. So it's lots of fun. It's learning, but it's really fun learning.
Okay, awesome. Well, you've heard it here. If you want to know more about the FLY group, where you get the support that you need with people who are learning right alongside you, walking alongside you, no judgment, keeping your confidences, then the FLY group is for you. In order to get there, call MBRC. The number will be at the end of this video, or check out the website at mbrcinc.org. There's a lot of letters. But thank you so much for being here, Dr. Jackson.
Oh, my pleasure.
All right, thank you.
Thanks.
And those of you, see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye now.